The first knock came at 4:17 in the morning, and I knew before I checked the camera who it would be. Not because I'm psychic, because I'd imagined this moment for 11 years. I'd rehearsed it while stacking canned goods in the dark. I'd whispered versions of it to myself while calibrating the water filtration system, while testing the backup generator, while my wife Karen sat upstairs watching television and pretending the basement door didn't exist. I had a script. I had the exact tone I'd use: calm, measured, magnanimous, but firm. I'd say something like, "I'm not the kind of man who says I told you so." And the beauty of that sentence is that it says, "I told you so," while pretending it doesn't. The face on the monitor was Greg Linder's. Of course it was Greg. Greg from the 4th of July barbecue in 2019, who'd stood in my driveway holding a Coors Light and said, loud enough for 14 neighbors to hear, "Nate's got a bunker in case the zombies come. Nate, buddy, you know zombies aren't real, right?" And everyone laughed. Karen laughed. My daughter Bree, who was 13 at the time, looked at the ground and said nothing, which was worse than laughing, because it meant she'd learned to be embarrassed by me, and had decided the merciful thing was silence. Greg's face on the screen looked nothing like it had in 2019. His left eye was swollen shut. He was holding his 9-year-old son, Caleb, against his chest with both arms, and the boy's legs were dangling like he was asleep. But the way Greg kept shifting his grip told me Caleb was dead weight. Behind them, Greg's wife Dana was facing the tree line with a tire iron in one hand. She wasn't watching the bunker door. She was watching the dark between the pines. I want to tell you, I opened the door immediately. That I was the man I'd always claimed I was building down here. Prepared, generous, community-minded. The man who prepped not out of paranoia, but out of love for his neighbors. I didn't open the door immediately. I sat in my chair and I watched Greg Linder hold his unconscious son on a 6-inch screen. And for 9 seconds, I felt something I had never once allowed myself to name in 11 years of preparation. I felt glad. Not glad they were suffering. That's not it. And I need to be precise here because what happened later makes precision important. I was glad I was right. I was glad the world had rearranged itself into the exact shape I'd warned everyone about. I was glad that Greg Linder, Greg with his barbecue confidence, Greg who never bought a flashlight that wasn't on his phone, was standing on my reinforced concrete doorstep at 4 in the morning, needing me. That 9 seconds is the truest thing I've ever done. Everything before, it was preparation. Everything after it was performance. "Karen," I said. She was already awake. She'd been awake since the emergency broadcast system had taken over every channel at midnight, with its flat, mechanical voice reading words that sounded like they'd been written by someone whose hands were shaking. She was sitting on the edge of our cot with her knees together and her hands in her lap. And she looked at me the way she'd been looking at me since we'd sealed the door 14 hours earlier, with a new expression I couldn't read. Gratitude, maybe, or something adjacent to gratitude that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. "Greg's outside," I said. "Dana and Caleb." "Open the door." "I know. I'm going to." "Then open it." She said it flat, no accusation in it. But she'd seen me sitting in the chair, and she knew the 9 seconds had happened, even if she couldn't have described what filled them. Karen has always known things about me that I haven't formally told her. It's one of the reasons I married her, and one of the reasons marriage is sometimes like living with a mirror you can't turn to the wall. I opened the door. Greg fell through it carrying Caleb and said my name the way no one had ever said it before. Nate. Oh God, Nate. It was the way you say a word when the word is the only structure left between you and total dissolution. He said it like a prayer, which meant he said it like I was the answer to one. And I want to be honest about what that felt like, because honesty is the only currency I have left. It felt like 11 years of mockery being repaid in a single syllable. I helped him lay Caleb on the cot Karen had already stripped and resheeted. The boy wasn't bitten. I checked immediately. Gloves on, penlight in my teeth, running the beam along his arms, his neck, his ankles. He'd fainted. Dehydration and terror, I figured. His pulse was steady. His skin was cool but not cold. I told Greg his son was going to be fine, and Greg sat on the concrete floor and put his face in his hands and made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make. Dana came in last. She set the tire iron against the wall and looked around the bunker with an expression I recognized because I'd rehearsed receiving it. Awe. The space was 800 square feet, poured reinforced concrete walls, 12-foot ceilings, filtered air circulation, 3-month food supply for 4 people, a medical station, a water purification system I'd assembled over 6 years, from plans I bought from a retired Navy engineer in Pensacola. It was the physical manifestation of everything they'd laughed at. Every dollar Karen had silently resented. Every Saturday I'd spent down here instead of at Bree's soccer games. "You actually built all this," Dana said. I did. "It's Nate, this is..." "I know what it is." Karen looked at me when I said that. I heard myself and understood why. I know what it is. 3 days ago, that sentence would have been defensive. Now it was something else. Proprietary. I caught it, but I caught it the way you catch a ball that's already past you. The motion is correct, the timing is not. Bree was in the back room with her headphones on. She was 17 now, and she'd been quiet since we'd sealed the bunker. Not the frightened quiet of a teenager in crisis, but the watchful quiet of someone cataloging adult behavior for later judgment. She'd come out when she heard the door open, seen the Linders, and gone back without speaking. I told myself she was processing. What she was actually doing was something I wouldn't understand for another 36 hours. I gave Greg water. I gave Dana a clean towel and showed her the chemical toilet behind the partition curtain. I checked Caleb's pupils and hydrated him with an electrolyte solution I'd mixed from a recipe I'd memorized in 2016. I was competent and thorough and generous, and every single gesture felt like a victory lap I was pretending was a humanitarian act. Here's the thing about being a prepper that the community never talks about. The preparation isn't really about survival. Not entirely. It's about a fantasy of being necessary. You stack cans, and you calibrate filters, and you seal concrete. Because somewhere underneath the rational calculations is a small, hot, hungry part of you that wants the world to need you. That wants to be the man with the answers when the answers run out everywhere else. That wants the Greg Linders of the world on your floor, saying your name like it's the name of God. I'd always told myself the bunker was about protecting Karen and Bree. And it was. That's true. But truth has layers. And the bottom layer of this particular truth was that I'd spent 11 years building a stage for my own vindication, and the apocalypse had drawn the curtain. The radio was still cycling the emergency broadcast. I'd set it to scan all frequencies, and between the automated loops, I was catching fragments, military channels overwhelmed with traffic, civilian bands full of screaming and static. A woman on a ham frequency reading Bible verses in a voice that had gone past fear into a kind of mechanical calm. The picture assembling itself from these fragments was exactly what I'd modeled. Urban centers collapsing first. Infrastructure failing in concentric rings. The infection spreading faster than containment protocols could adapt because the protocols were designed for diseases that didn't make the dead stand up. I knew all of this already. I'd known it theoretically for a decade. But knowing a thing and watching it happen are different animals. and the second one has teeth. How bad is it? Greg asked from the floor. Bad. How bad, Nate? I looked at him. His one open eye was red and wet, and it held an expression I will not exaggerate. He was looking at me the way a child looks at a parent who has promised the dark can't hurt them. I've got supplies for 4 people for 90 days, I said. With 6 of us, that's 60. I said it evenly, factually. And a part of me, the part I'm trying to dissect here because it matters, noted that I'd framed the information to make them feel the cost of their presence. Not cruelly, subtly. I built this for 4. You make it 6. The math changed because you're here. Karen heard it. She always hears it. By noon the next day, we were 9. Teresa Huang and her mother Lynn arrived at 6 a.m. with a rolling suitcase and a Ziploc bag full of prescription medications. Teresa lived 4 houses down and worked as a dental hygienist. She'd always been polite to me, a nod at the mailbox, a wave from her car, and she'd never once mentioned the bunker, which meant she'd never mocked it, but also never taken it seriously. She knocked with both fists, rapid and measured, and when I opened the door, she said, "Nate, my mother needs her blood pressure medication refrigerated. Do you have power?" I did. I had a diesel generator with 800 gallons of fuel and a solar backup array that could keep essential systems running indefinitely. I told Teresa this and watched her shoulders drop 2 inches as the tension left them. "Thank you," she said, and her gratitude was clean. No history in it, no barbecue laughter to repay. Just a woman with an elderly mother who needed a cold place for pills. It should have been easier to receive than Greg's desperate prayer of my name. It wasn't. Because Teresa's clean gratitude didn't feed the thing I was pretending wasn't hungry. I caught myself thinking that, and felt the first cold finger of something I didn't yet recognize as shame. Lin Huang was 78 and spoke limited English and sat on the cot I gave her with her hands folded and her eyes tracking everything in the room with a precision that reminded me she'd survived things I'd only prepped for. She said something to Teresa in Mandarin, and Teresa hesitated before translating. She says the concrete is good. She says it reminds her of her father's factory in Wuhan. She says you should check the ventilation seams. I'd already checked them, twice. But I said, "Tell her thank you. I will." At 9 a.m., my neighbor Paul Cassidy came alone. His wife Jen had been at her sister's in Columbus when the broadcasts started, and the highways were impassable. Paul was a big man, 6'3", quiet. An electrician who'd once helped me run conduit for the bunker's lighting system on a Saturday afternoon and charged me nothing. He was the only neighbor who'd ever been inside. He arrived carrying a toolbox and a case of bottled water. And when I opened the door, he said, "I brought what I could carry. Put me to work." No groveling, no awe, just competence arriving with its own tools. I respected Paul, and respect is harder to corrupt than gratitude because it moves in 2 directions. "I could use someone on the generator maintenance rotation," I said. Done. Paul went to the generator room, and I heard him open his toolbox and begin checking connections without being told which ones. He'd remembered the layout from 4 years ago. I was standing at the door mechanism when the last knock came, 11 a.m. I checked the camera and felt my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. It was Dominic Marsh. Dominic was the reason I'd started prepping, not because of zombies, because of Dominic himself. He was the kind of man whose confidence reorganized every room he entered. He'd moved onto our street in 2014, and within a year, he was running the Homeowners Association, organizing the block party, standing in driveways with his hand on your shoulder, telling you things about your own house you hadn't noticed. He was generous, social, effortlessly competent, in ways that made my own competence feel like something assembled from instruction manuals, which it was. Dominic had never laughed at my bunker. He'd done something worse. At the 2019 barbecue, after Greg's zombie joke, after the laughter, Dominic had found me alone by the cooler and said, "Hey, Nate, don't worry about Greg. Everybody needs a project." And he'd squeezed my shoulder and moved on. And the sentence had lodged in me like a fishhook because it was kind and dismissive in exactly equal measure. Everybody needs a project. Not everybody needs a bunker. Not everybody should prepare. Everybody needs a project. As in, this is your hobby, and it's fine. The way a child's crayon drawing is fine. Now Dominic was on my doorstep with his 12-year-old daughter Maya, and a cut on his forearm that was deep enough to see pink tissue beneath the blood. His face was calm. Dominic's face was always calm. "Nate," he said, "I need you to look at this cut before you decide whether to let us in. It's not a bite, it's glass. I went through a window, but you need to verify." Even now, even standing in the ruins of everything he'd understood about the world, Dominic was managing the interaction. He was giving me authority and structuring how I used it in the same breath. I put on gloves and examined the wound under the penlight. Lacerations, clean-edged, consistent with glass, not teeth. No discoloration, no surrounding inflammation. I dressed it with supplies from my medical station. "Come in," I said. "Thank you, Nate." And there it was again. My name said with weight, but from Dominic, it didn't sound like worship. It sounded like a concession. Like a man who'd spent his whole life being the capable one had encountered a situation where capability meant something he hadn't invested in. And the recalibration was costing him something I could almost taste. We were 9 now. The bunker was built for 4. I started keeping a list on the second day. Not a supply inventory, I had 7 of those, updated on rotating schedules, color-coded by category. This was a different list. I kept it in a small notebook I carried in my back pocket. And I wrote in it only when I was alone in the generator room with the diesel hum covering the scratch of the pen. The list was a ranking. I ranked the 9 people in my bunker by usefulness. Paul was at the top. Electrician, self-directed, brought his own tools, required no management. Teresa was second. Medical adjacent knowledge, calm under pressure, managed her mother without complaint. Dominic was third, and putting him third instead of first was a decision I made slowly and deliberately, because Dominic was objectively the most capable person in the bunker. But his capability threatened mine, and I was aware of this. And I ranked him third anyway. Karen was fourth. My wife. She cooked, she cleaned, she managed interpersonal temperature with a diplomatic instinct I lacked entirely. She was the reason the 9 of us could occupy 800 square feet without someone throwing a punch. But she was my wife. And the list was supposed to be objective. And ranking her higher would have felt like cheating on a test I was giving myself. Greg was 5th. Willing, physical, no skills. He followed directions well. His gratitude made him pliable. Dana was 6th. Same as Greg, minus the physical strength, plus the advantage of being sharp enough to manage Caleb's needs without drawing on common resources more than necessary. Bree was 7th. My daughter, 17, consuming resources, contributing nothing visible, watching. Lin Huang was 8th. Elderly, limited mobility, medication-dependent, non-English speaking. A pure liability on every metric the bunker recognized. Caleb Linder was 9th. a child. I looked at this list in the generator room on the second night, and I want to tell you I was horrified by it. I want to tell you I tore it out and burned it, and felt the appropriate moral revulsion at having ranked a 9-year-old boy last on a list of human beings sorted by their utility to me. I didn't tear it out. I added a column for daily caloric consumption. This is who I was on day 2. The man in the chair who'd waited 9 seconds before opening the door, now holding a notebook in a humming room, organizing human beings into a spreadsheet. And the worst part, the part that makes this confession necessary, is that it felt good. Not cruel, not cold, good, orderly. The bunker was a system, and I was the system administrator. I'd built the hardware. I'd stocked the reserves. I'd calculated the load-bearing capacity. And now I was optimizing the population against the resource curve the way I'd always optimized everything down here. With precision, with foresight, with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose obsession had been retroactively reclassified as wisdom. Karen found the list on day 3. Not because I was careless, because she looked. She'd seen the notebook. She'd watched me carry it into the generator room. She knew me the way a woman who's lived with an obsessive for 20 years knows him. Not by what he says, but by what he protects from being seen. She didn't confront me. She set the notebook on my pillow, opened to the page, and went to help Teresa prepare dinner. When I came to the sleeping area and saw it lying there, I understood that she hadn't needed to say anything, because the page said it all, and my reaction to being caught would say the rest. I closed the notebook. I put it in my back pocket. I went to dinner and served rice and canned vegetables to 9 people in a concrete room. And I did not apologize, because I'd not yet understood what I'd done. What I'd done was build a court. Not a shelter, not a bunker, not a community. A court with myself as the seated authority, and every person inside it arranged by their distance from my approval. Greg at my feet, grateful and diminished. Paul at my right hand, useful and therefore valued. Dominic on the periphery, capable but unmanaged. A threat to the hierarchy I hadn't admitted I was building. And at the very center of it, without a number on any list, was me. The man who'd been laughed at, the man who'd been right, the man whose name people now said the way they used to say the names of people who mattered. I was becoming a king in a room I'd built to be a lifeboat. Dominic didn't challenge me directly. That would have been simpler. What he did was worse. He was useful without asking permission. On the morning of day 3, I woke to the sound of hammering light, precise, and coming from the storage corridor. I found Dominic installing a shelf system he'd fabricated from disassembled cot frames and zip ties. He'd reorganized the canned goods by caloric density and expiration date, created a rotating access system so no one person controlled distribution, and labeled everything with adhesive tape and a marker he'd brought in his pocket. It was better than my system. Mine was organized by food category. His was organized by survival math. "Figured I'd make myself useful," he said when he saw me standing in the corridor entrance. He said it with that same Dominic ease, no apology, no request, just a man doing competent work in a space that wasn't his. "You should have asked me first." I said it before I decided to say it. It came out of the part of me that had written the list. The part that understood the bunker as an extension of my body. And Dominic's reorganization as someone rearranging my internal organs without consent. He stopped hammering. He looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen from Dominic Marsh in 12 years of neighborhood proximity. Patience. not the patience of a man waiting for a fool to finish talking. The patience of a man who understood that the fool was also the man with the keys and the generator and the 800 gallons of diesel, and that managing this fool was now a survival skill. "You're right," he said. "I should have. I'll check with you next time." He went back to hammering. The shelf was already done. The concession cost him nothing and gave me everything, and we both knew it. That afternoon, Karen and Teresa organized a group dinner at the long table I'd built in 2021. A fold-down surface designed for 4, extended with plywood to seat 9. Lin Huang sat at one end and said something in Mandarin, and Teresa laughed and translated. She says in China, 9 at a table means someone is getting married. Everyone laughed. Even Bree, who'd barely spoken in 3 days, smiled from behind her hair. It was the first communal laughter in the bunker, and it changed the air pressure in a way I could feel on my skin. I didn't laugh. I was counting portions. Greg had served himself more rice than the allocation I'd calculated. Not much more. Maybe 2 tablespoons. But I saw it, and I logged it, and I felt a flash of irritation that was completely out of proportion to 2 tablespoons of rice and entirely in proportion to what 2 tablespoons of rice meant in a system where I controlled the math. "Greg," I said, "portions are measured. There's a cup in the rice container." The table went quiet, not silent quiet. The difference is that silence is empty and quiet is full of things people are choosing not to say. Greg looked at his plate. "Sorry, Nate. Wasn't thinking." "It matters. Every surplus portion shortens our timeline by—" "He said he's sorry," Dana said. I looked at Dana. Her face was polite. Her eyes were not. "I'm just explaining the system." "We understand the system." Dominic's voice from the other end of the table. Calm, reasonable. The voice of a man who'd managed a homeowners association and knew exactly how to make authority sound like consensus. "Nate's right that portions matter. Maybe we post the measurements on the wall so everyone can self-monitor." It was a better solution than mine. It distributed responsibility instead of centralizing surveillance. It solved the same problem without making Greg feel like a child caught stealing. I hated it. Not because it was wrong. Because it was right, and it wasn't mine. Because Dominic had taken my correction and rebuilt it into something more humane, in front of everyone. And the table had shifted toward him the way tables always shifted toward him. And I could feel the hierarchy. I'd been building my hierarchy in my bunker, with my food bending under the weight of a man who was simply better with people than I was. "Good idea," I said, because I had to. I went to the generator room afterward. I opened the notebook. I moved Dominic to 5th on the list, below Dana. That's how petty vindication makes you. It doesn't sharpen your teeth, it shrinks your hands. Day 5 brought the second wave. I'd installed a motion sensor perimeter around the bunker entrance, passive infrared, battery-powered, with an alert that buzzed a handheld unit I kept clipped to my belt. At 2 a.m., the unit buzzed 3 times in rapid succession, meaning multiple heat signatures within 50 feet. I went to the camera. 4 people, 2 men, 2 women. One of the men was carrying a child on his back, maybe 3 years old. They were moving in the exhausted shuffle of people who'd been walking for hours, not the stiff, directionless gait of the infected. These were living people. Behind them, at the tree line, shapes were moving. I'd seen the infected on camera before. On day 1, a few had wandered across the property slow, uncoordinated, drawn by some stimulus I hadn't identified. They'd passed the bunker entrance without noticing it, which validated my concealment design. The door was recessed into a hillside, camouflaged with native vegetation, invisible from more than 20 feet away. But these 4 survivors were heading straight for it, which meant either they'd seen it during construction or someone had told them. "Nate," Karen was behind me. "Who is it?" "I don't know them." I studied the screen. The man with the child was limping. The women were supporting each other, one of them with a blood-soaked bandage around her left hand. I counted the shapes at the tree line. 6, maybe 7, moving slowly but converging on the same trajectory as the survivors, drawn by noise or heat or whatever navigational input drove them. The 4 people reached the door. One of the men found the exterior handle I'd installed as an emergency entry point, locked from inside. He pulled it, and when it didn't give, he knocked. I watched the shapes at the tree line move closer. "Nate," Karen said again. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "Open the door." "Karen, we're at 9. The bunker supports 4. Every person we add, there's a child." "I can see the child." "Open the door." "One of the women is bleeding. I can't determine the cause from the camera. If that's a bite, then check her the way you check Dominic, outside. But open the door first." She was right. Operationally, medically, morally, she was right. The protocol I'd written myself specified exactly this: visual inspection of wounds at the threshold, quarantine in the decontamination vestibule for 12 hours if ambiguous, admission if clear. I'd designed the system. The system had an answer. And I was hesitating, not because the system was unclear, but because 13 people in an 800-square-foot bunker meant I was losing control of the math, and the math was the last place where my authority was unchallengeable. The shapes were 30 feet from the survivors now. I opened the door. The next 40 seconds were the loudest of my life. The limping man came through first, swinging the child off his back and into Karen's arms in one motion. The 2 women followed. The second man, younger, bearded, eyes wide and unseeing with adrenaline, came last. And as he crossed the threshold, one of the infected reached the door frame. I saw it up close for the first time. Not on a screen, not in the theoretical models I'd studied, not in the planning documents I'd assembled from CDC contingency papers and speculative epidemiology. A human body operating without a human being inside it. The face was a woman's, middle-aged, and the eyes were open, and they tracked me, and there was nothing behind them that I recognized as thought. Just input, just response. I slammed the door. The locks engaged 3 deadbolts and a crossbar, motorized, faster than any hand could throw. The sound of the infected hitting the exterior surface was dull and persistent, like heavy rain on a car roof. In my bunker, a 3-year-old was crying. A woman was bleeding. 13 people were breathing my air. I hadn't checked the wounded woman yet. Her name was Jess, and the wound on her hand was from a kitchen knife, not teeth. She'd been cutting through a chain-link fence when the blade slipped. I examined it in the decontamination vestibule with gloves and the pen light, while the others waited in the main room. And I was thorough because thoroughness was my vocabulary for caring. And because I needed 3 minutes alone with a problem I could solve with procedures instead of judgment. The cut was deep across her left palm, running from the base of the index finger to the wrist. It needed stitches I didn't have the training to place. I cleaned it with antiseptic from my medical station, applied butterfly closures, wrapped it in sterile gauze, and told her to keep it elevated. "Thank you," she said. "You saved our lives." There it was, the sentence, the one I'd built 11 years of infrastructure to hear. And from Jess, it was pure, no history, no barbecue, no Coors Light joke. Just a woman with a cut hand and a clear eye, looking at me like I was the reason she was still breathing. I let it land. I let it sit in my chest where the warmth was. And then I went back to the main room and introduced the new arrivals to the group, and assigned sleeping spaces, and adjusted the ration calculations, and felt the bunker reorganize itself around me like a body around a spine. The new people were Jess and her partner Marco, both in their 30s, both from a subdivision 3 miles east that had been overrun on day one. The bearded man was Sam, a stranger they'd picked up on the road. The limping man was Terrence, early 40s, an Army veteran who'd carried Sam's daughter Ruby on his back for 2 miles after Sam's arms gave out. Terrence was quiet. Not Greg's broken quiet or Lynn's watchful quiet, but the quiet of a man who'd learned in some prior life that speaking costs something, and you should check your balance first. He shook my hand when I introduced myself and said, "Good bunker." And that was it for 12 hours. I liked Terrence immediately. He did not threaten my hierarchy. He did not compete for attention. He took the sleeping spot I assigned without comment and ate the portion I measured without supplementing. Sam was different. Sam was grateful the way Greg was grateful, loudly, repeatedly, with a gratitude that made me larger every time it was expressed. "Man, you built this? You built all of this? This is incredible. We were dead. We were literally dead. And you opened the door. Ruby, say thank you to Mr. Nate." Ruby was 3 and said nothing, just clutched her father's neck and stared at me with enormous brown eyes. I said, "You're safe now." And I meant it. And I also heard myself saying it, and recognized the voice as one that belonged to a man performing safety rather than providing it. The words were true. The tone was a costume. By day 6, the bunker had a social architecture I hadn't designed, but had enabled. The grateful ones, Greg, Sam, Jess, gravitated toward me. They asked before taking food. They thanked me when I solved problems. They deferred to my judgment on scheduling, noise discipline, and water usage. They were my constituency, and their deference was warm and constant, and it was killing something in me that I couldn't yet name. The competent ones, Dominic, Paul, Teresa, Terrence, formed a separate orbit. They solved problems without asking. They improved systems without consulting me. They interacted with me as a peer, which was accurate and which I experienced as a demotion. Karen moved between both groups, belonging to neither, observing both. She was the only person in the bunker who treated me exactly the same as she had before the world ended, with a specific, unsentimental attention that saw everything and approved selectively. Bree remained in the back room. On the evening of day 6, Dominic and Paul came to me together. Dominic spoke. Paul stood slightly behind, which was a formation I recognized as rehearsed Dominic's social fluency out front. Paul's quiet legitimacy is backing. "Nate, we want to suggest a governance structure." The word governance landed in my chest like a stone in still water. Concentric ripples of alarm spreading outward from the impact point. What kind of structure? Nothing complicated. Rotating responsibilities, collective decisions on resource allocation, transparent inventory. You'd still be "this is your bunker, Nate." No one's disputing that. But 13 people need more than one decision maker. Why? Paul spoke for the first time. Because it's fair. Fair. The word of people who hadn't spent 11 years and $140,000 building an unfair advantage. The word of people who'd arrived empty-handed and now wanted to vote on how to distribute what I'd filled my hands with. "I'll think about it," I said. I went to the generator room. I opened the notebook. I didn't write anything. I just held it. The governance proposal sat between us for 2 days like a piece of furniture no one had agreed to put in the room. Dominic didn't push. Paul didn't mention it again. But both of them, and Teresa and Terence, began making small decisions without consulting me. A shift in the cleaning rotation, an adjustment to the water schedule, a reorganization of the sleeping arrangement that gave Lin Huang better access to the chemical toilet. Each change was reasonable. Each change was an improvement. Each change was a brick removed from the wall of my authority. On day 8, Sam came to me privately. He stood close, spoke low, and said, "Nate, I just want you to know whatever you decide, I support you. You built this. You earned the right to run it. Don't let them take that away from you." I should have heard the alarm in that sentence. I should have heard a man offering loyalty as currency, purchasing influence by telling me what I wanted to hear. What I heard instead was validation. And validation from Sam cost nothing to accept and paid dividends in certainty. I appreciate that, Sam. I mean it. Greg feels the same way. Jess, too. We've been talking, and you're the reason we're alive. That has to mean something. That has to count for more than I mean. Dominic shows up on day 1 with his arm bleeding, and now he wants to vote on how your food gets distributed? It was ugly. It was exactly what the worst part of me believed, reflected back in someone else's voice. And hearing it externally made it feel like consensus rather than vanity. "I'm not making any changes right now," I said. "We're fine the way we are." "Good. That's good, Nate." Sam went back to the main room. I stayed where I was and tried to identify the feeling in my chest, a warmth, a rightness, a sense of the world correctly ordered. And I could not name it because I had never been the popular one. I had never been the one people sought out, confided in, aligned with. I had been the man with the bunker in the basement, the project in the yard, the hobby everyone tolerated. And now, in a concrete room underground, I was the center. I was the provider. I was the man whose name people said with reverence. And the reverence was replacing something in me, something I needed, something that Karen saw being replaced and could not stop because the thing replacing it was so close to love that it used love's entrance without love's ID. On day 9, I made a decision that I now understand was the first irreversible one. I implemented a rationing system that required all food distribution to pass through me personally. Not a lockbox, not a rotation me. Physically, every meal, every snack, every caloric unit dispensed by my hands from the supply I had purchased, stored, and organized. My reasoning was sound. 13 people drawing freely from a finite supply would create waste, inequality, and conflict. Centralized distribution ensured fairness, accuracy, and timeline adherence. Every prepper manual I'd ever read recommended exactly this approach. My reasoning was also a lie wrapped in a spreadsheet. The truth was that the moment when people came to me with their hands out and I filled them was the moment when the bunker made the most sense. When I was most necessary. When the 11 years and the $140,000 and the Saturday mornings and the laughter and the condescension and Greg's Coors Light joke all resolved into a single, clear, inarguable image. Me, holding food, giving it to people who needed me to give it to them. Karen watched the first centralized meal distribution from the doorway of the sleeping area. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her face was a paragraph I could read, but chose not to. That night, Bree came out of the back room She walked to the food station where I was cleaning the distribution containers, tin camping plates I'd bought in bulk in 2018. Each one stamped with my initials on the bottom because I'd used a metal punch to mark all bunker property, which at the time seemed like inventory management, and now seemed like something a pharaoh does to his tomb goods. Dad. Hey, B, you hungry? I've got the evening allocation set aside for you. I'm not hungry. She stood there, 17 and thin and wearing a sweatshirt she'd owned since she was 15, sleeves pulled over her hands, hair unwashed. She looked like every teenager and like no one else. Dad, why did you build this? To keep us safe. That's what you say. Why did you really build it? Bree, I don't know what you're... Mrs. Huang's on your list last. I saw it. You ranked a 78-year-old woman last. The floor moved. Not literally, the bunker's foundation was solid. I'd poured it myself, but the stable surface beneath my self-concept shifted, and I felt the first fissure open between who I was performing and who I was. That list is a resource management tool. It's a ranking of people, Dad. You ranked people. Bree. Caleb's 9. She turned and went back to the room and closed the door. And the sound of that door closing was quieter than a whisper and louder than anything that had happened since the world ended. Day 10. 13 people in 800 square feet. The air filtration system was performing above spec. I'd overbuilt it deliberately, anticipating exactly this kind of population overshoot, but the human systems were failing in ways no filter could address. Greg and Sam had become my informal enforcers, not through any instruction of mine, through the natural physics of gratitude seeking proximity to its source. When Dominic adjusted the shelf labels, Sam said, loudly enough for the room, "Maybe check with Nate before moving your stuff around." When Teresa suggested opening a second case of medical supplies for Lynn's worsening cough, Greg asked me first, in front of Teresa, whether I authorized it. I authorized it, graciously, making sure Teresa saw the grace. This is what a court looks like from the inside. You don't build it. You emit a frequency, and the people who need your approval arrange themselves into a receiving pattern. And the people who don't need it become obstacles. And you begin without ever deciding to sorting the world into those who confirm you and those who threaten you. Terrence watched all of this from his corner. He ate what I gave him. He thanked me once per meal, briefly, with eye contact. He fixed things that broke a hinge on the storage door, a leak in the water line, a crack in the ventilation duct seal without announcing it, without asking, and without gratitude or resentment. He existed in my bunker the way a load-bearing wall exists in a house. Structurally essential, aesthetically invisible, uninterested in being thanked for holding up the ceiling. On the afternoon of day 10, he broke his silence. I was in the generator room, recalculating the fuel consumption curve. The new population had increased daily diesel usage by 31%, which compressed the operational timeline from the 60 days I'd quoted to 44. I was writing this in the notebook, not the list page, a different page, though the notebook itself had become a kind of talisman, a physical object that contained the version of myself I permitted only in private. Terrence appeared in the doorway. Got a minute? Sure. He sat on the fuel drum across from me. His hands hung between his knees. He was a man whose body knew how to be still without being at rest, a military artifact, I assumed. The posture of someone who'd learned that relaxation and readiness aren't opposites. How long did you serve? I asked. 12 years, 2 deployments. Thank you for your service. He looked at me the way a carpenter looks at a nail that's going in crooked. Not angry, diagnostic. Nate, I've seen this before. Seen what? What you're building in there. The inner circle, the outer circle, the ones who owe you and the ones who don't. I've seen it in FOBs, and I've seen it in refugee camps, and I've seen it in church basements after hurricanes. It always starts the same way. Someone with resources and a room and a need to be needed. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. You're a smart man. Smart enough to build all this. He gestured at the generator, the fuel drums, the conduit running along the ceiling. Smart enough to know what's happening when someone like Sam starts running interference for you against someone like Dominic. Sam is grateful. There's nothing wrong with gratitude. There's nothing wrong with water either, until you're drowning in it. He stood up. He'd said what he came to say. No follow-up, no argument. He paused at the door. The best CO I ever served under kept a picture of his family on his desk and another picture under it. Same family. The under picture was from before he got promoted. He said he looked at the under picture to remember who he was when he had no power over anyone. Said the top picture was who they wanted him to be. The bottom one was who they needed him to be. He left. I sat with the notebook open to the fuel consumption page, and I did not turn to the list page, and I did not close the notebook, and I stayed in the generator room for 40 minutes, and listening to the diesel engine cycle through its rhythm like a mechanical heartbeat, steady and indifferent, and entirely unimpressed by the man who'd built it. On day 12, the radio changed. I'd been monitoring continuously rotating through military, civilian, ham, and emergency bands on a schedule I designed in 2020 and never expected to execute. The first 11 days had produced a consistent picture. Collapse radiating outward, infrastructure failing, no coordinated response. The military channels that had been active on day 1 were mostly silent now, replaced by automated loops and occasional bursts of encrypted traffic I couldn't decode. The civilian bands were thinning, fewer voices each day. The ones that remained were either practical coordinates, supply locations, safe routes, or unmoored, broadcasting into the dark for the comfort of hearing themselves exist. On day 12, a new voice appeared on a frequency I hadn't been monitoring. This is FEMA Region 3 Emergency Coordination. We are establishing evacuation corridors in the following sectors. If you are receiving this broadcast, shelter in place and prepare for contact within 72 hours. Repeat, 72 hours. The voice was professional, clipped. The cadence of someone reading from a prepared script on functional equipment, not a survivor shouting into a handheld. It listed grid coordinates. One of them was close within 15 miles. I turned the volume down before anyone else could hear it. I want you to understand the speed of this decision. The broadcast entered my ears, and my hand moved to the dial in less than 2 seconds. There was no deliberation, no moral calculus. The signal traveled from my auditory cortex to my fingers, without passing through the part of my brain that asks questions. And the question it would have asked was, if FEMA is establishing evacuation corridors, then the bunker stops being the only shelter. And if the bunker stops being the only shelter, then I stop being the only provider. And if I stop being the only provider, I turned it down. This is not the action of a man protecting his community from false hope. This is the action of a man protecting his relevance from real rescue. I knew this. I knew it in the 2 seconds between hearing the broadcast and silencing it. The knowledge sat in me like a swallowed stone, heavy, indigestible, and impossible to cough up. Because coughing it up would mean showing everyone what I'd swallowed. For 6 hours, I held the information alone. During those 6 hours, I was the most attentive, the most generous, the most available version of myself. I distributed the evening meal with extra care. I checked Lynn's blood pressure. I played a card game with Caleb and Maya that I'd never once initiated before. I was performing the goodness of a man who was hoarding rescue. Bree found me at the radio at 11 p.m. She'd started coming out of the back room at night, when the bunker was dim and most people were sleeping. She moved through the space like a ghost, with opinions present, observing, saying nothing until she said everything. "What frequency is that?" "Just scanning." She sat down next to me. She didn't touch the radio. She didn't reach for the dial. She just sat there, and her sitting was a weight on the scale that my silence was trying to balance. "Bree, go to bed." I heard it. The stone in my stomach turned over. Heard what? The FEMA broadcast. This afternoon, I was in the corridor. The corridor was a 4-foot wide passage between the main room and the generator room, lined with supply shelving. The radio sat at the junction. If she'd been in the corridor when the broadcast came through, she'd heard the voice, the coordinates, and the sound of me turning it down. "It's unverified," I said. "Could be a recording, could be a lure. There are people out there using broadcasts to draw survivors to ambush points. I need to confirm before I say anything." "Have you been trying to confirm?" "I've been monitoring." "That's not confirming. That's waiting." She was 17, and she was right. And the rightness of a 17-year-old who has caught her father in a moral failure is a specific kind of blade. It cuts without hatred, which makes the wound cleaner and deeper. "Bree, you don't understand the responsibility I have. If I tell 13 people that rescue is coming and it's not, the psychological damage. If you don't tell 13 people that rescue might be coming and it is, what do you call that?" I didn't answer. "Dad, what do you call that?" "Go to bed, Bree." She stood up. She looked at me, and in her face I saw an expression I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror for 47 years. The expression of a person who understands that the person they love is capable of something small and is choosing not to look away. "I'll give you until morning," she said. "Then I'm telling everyone myself." She went back to the room. I sat at the radio. The stone in my stomach had become a geography, an entire landscape of shame that I could walk through and describe in detail, but could not leave because the exits all required saying words I hadn't yet assembled. I told them at breakfast. Not because I'd found the courage overnight. Because Bree was sitting at the table with her eyes on me, and her silence was a countdown. And the countdown was more frightening than the broadcast, because it terminated in my daughter becoming the person who revealed what her father had hidden. And that transformation Bree from silent observer to public witness would have been an alteration of her I couldn't undo. So I told them. I played the broadcast, I gave the coordinates. I explained the 72-hour window, now reduced to 66. I said, with rehearsed evenness, I wanted to verify before sharing to avoid false hope. I wasn't able to verify. The broadcast may be legitimate. The room reorganized itself in real time. Greg's face opened like a window. Sam grabbed Ruby and stood up. Dana put her hand on Caleb's shoulder and looked at the ceiling as if she could see sky through 12 feet of concrete. Teresa spoke to Lynn in rapid Mandarin, and Lynn nodded and said something back that made Teresa's eyes fill. Dominic looked at me. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He looked at me the way a man looks at a foundation he's been testing with his foot. And the look said, I know when you heard this. I know what the 6 hours were. And I am not going to say it because saying it costs more than it gains, and the information is out now, and the damage of your delay is measurable, but not lethal. Paul was already at the map I'd posted on the wall, a topographic survey of the surrounding 12 miles that I'd laminated in 2019. He was measuring the distance to the coordinates with a ruler and a grease pencil. 15 miles. If we move light, that's a full day on foot. Maybe less if the roads are clear. The roads won't be clear, Terrence said from his corner. No, but 15 miles through woods is still 15 miles. Doable. Karen was watching me. Not the room, not the map, not the celebrating survivors. Me. She was watching me the way she'd watched me since day one, with that new expression I'd finally learned to read. Not gratitude, not resentment, grief. She was grieving for the man I'd been before I was right. And she was watching the man I'd become since. And the distance between them was growing every hour, and she couldn't close it because the bunker was making the second man stronger and the first man quieter. We should take a vote, Dominic said. On what? I asked. On whether to go, whether to send a team, whether to all go, whether to stay. It affects everyone. Everyone should decide. This is my bunker. I built it. I stocked it. I designed it to sustain us for... Nate. Terrence. One word. My name. Said the way a hand touches a shoulder, not to push, to steady. I stopped talking. Let them vote, Terrence said. I looked around the room. 13 faces. Some hopeful, some frightened, some careful. Greg was watching me with that familiar suppliant expression, waiting to see what I wanted so he could want it too. Sam was already nodding, agreeing with whatever outcome kept him closest to my approval. Jess and Marco were holding hands. Caleb was drawing on a piece of paper. Maya was leaning against Dominic's leg. Lin Huang was sitting with her hands folded, watching me with that same factory floor precision, measuring the quality of the concrete by the behavior of the man who poured it. And Bree. Bree was looking at her plate. She'd won. She'd forced the information out. And she wasn't gloating or relieved. She was sad. Because forcing your father to be decent is a victory that costs the winner more than the loser. Fine, I said. We vote. 12-1. 12 in favor of sending a scouting team to the coordinates. 1 against. I was the one. Not because I thought the broadcast was false. Not because I calculated the risk as unacceptable. Because leaving the bunker meant the bunker stopped being the center, and I stopped being the king, and the 11 years stopped meaning what I needed them to mean. I voted no, and everyone saw the reason, and I couldn't take it back and make it about risk assessment after the fact, because 13 people in close quarters for 12 days have learned to read each other with a fluency that makes lying a dialect everyone recognizes. Dominic said, "Motion carries. We send a team tomorrow at dawn." He said it gently. He said it the way you say a thing to a man who has just shown the room his worst self and needs the conversation to keep moving so the silence doesn't finish what the vote started. I went to the generator room. I closed the door. I opened the notebook to the list, and I looked at it for a long time. Then I tore it out. Not because I'd become a better man, because the page was evidence. And even in my diminished state, I understood that evidence should be destroyed. The destruction was not moral. It was procedural. I want to be clear about that because the story I'm telling you has to be accurate, or it's just another shelter I built to protect myself. The scouting team left at dawn on day 13. Terrence led. Paul went second. Dominic volunteered, and I watched him pack a bag with the efficiency of a man who'd organized block parties and now organized survival with the same unnerving competence. I did not volunteer. There was a conversation I could have had with myself about why. Operational continuity. generator maintenance, the value of institutional knowledge staying with the fixed asset. All true, all insufficient. The real reason was that I couldn't leave the bunker because the bunker was me, the physical expression of everything I'd invested, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd been mocked for. Leaving it meant becoming a man in the woods with no more authority than the man walking next to him. And I'd spent 11 years making sure I'd never be that man again. They left through the main door at 5:47 a.m. I sealed it behind them and turned to the remaining 10. Karen, Bree, Greg, Dana, Caleb, Sam, Ruby, Jess, Marco, Teresa, and Lynn. 11. I'd miscounted. I recounted. 10 others. 11 total, including me. The math error embarrassed me in a way that felt like a symptom. The first hours without Dominic were a relief I'm ashamed to describe. The room was mine again. The air moved differently. Greg and Sam orbited me with renewed intensity, and their gratitude filled the space Dominic had occupied with competence. And the exchange rate was unfavorable, but I accepted it because gratitude was the currency I knew how to spend. At noon, Karen sat down across from me at the table. She put her hands flat on the surface, which was a gesture I recognized from 20 years of marriage as the opening position of a conversation she'd been constructing for days. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it from me before you hear it from yourself and decide it doesn't count. Okay? I am grateful that you built this place. I am grateful that Bree is alive because of what you did. Those things are true, and they will always be true, and I will never deny them. Okay? And you are becoming someone I don't recognize, not slowly, not gradually. Fast. Faster every day. You are becoming a man who ranks human beings in a notebook and hides rescue broadcasts and votes against hope and enjoys, Nate, I need to say this word, enjoys having people need you more than he enjoys having people be safe. The sentence landed in the room like a body dropped from height. Clean impact, total breakage. That's not fair. It's completely fair. I watched you turn down that radio. I was in the corridor too. The geography of shame expanded. Not just Bree, Karen. Both of them in the corridor. Both of them hearing the FEMA broadcast. Both of them hearing me silence it. Both of them giving me time to correct myself. And the time I used to correct myself being the 6 hours I spent performing generosity to cover the theft. I was going to tell everyone. When? I needed to. When, Nate? I didn't answer. The answer was, when telling them still let me control the response. When I could frame the information as my gift rather than everyone's right. When the announcement could still be a moment of my authority rather than a moment of collective decision. You built this bunker to prove something, Karen said. And the world proved it for you. And the proof is eating you alive. The laughing didn't break you, Nate. Being right is breaking you. She stood up. She touched my hand briefly, the way you touch a stove to check if it's hot, ready to pull back. I love you. Bree loves you. We loved you before the bunker. We loved you when they laughed. We loved the man who built this place. I'm telling you, that man is disappearing. And what's replacing him is someone who needs to be needed more than he needs to be good. She walked away. I sat at the table in the bunker I'd built with my own hands, surrounded by the provisions I'd selected and stored and organized and rationed. And for the first time in 12 days, I felt the concrete walls not as protection, but as an outline, a mold, a shape I'd poured myself into. And the pouring was still happening. And the shape was getting smaller while I told myself it was getting stronger. The scouting team came back on day 14 at dusk. I heard them on the motion sensor before I saw them on camera, 4 heat signatures moving steadily from the north. And behind them, spaced at intervals, more. I counted on the screen. 4 in front, then a gap, then 6, then another gap, then a loose cluster of maybe 15, moving slower. Terrence's voice came through the walkie-talkie I'd given him from my supply. "Nate, open the door. The corridor's real. FEMA's got a staging area at the coordinates. Vehicles, medical, military escort. They can take everyone. But they're moving north in 48 hours, and they're not coming back." "Copy. How many are with you?" 21. Survivors from the route. They need water and rest before the final push. 21. Plus our 13. 34 people. In a bunker built for 4. "Terrence, I can't house 21 additional people. The space doesn't support." "They don't need the bunker, Nate. They need the water station and the medical supplies, and 8 hours of sleep inside a perimeter. The bunker's not a destination anymore. It's a waypoint. A waypoint." The word disassembled 11 years of identity in 4 syllables. A waypoint is a place you pass through. A place that serves a function and gets left behind. A dot on a map between where you were and where you're going. Not a destination, not a monument, not a vindication. I opened the door. They came in waves. Families, singles, an elderly couple supporting each other with arms linked. A teenage boy carrying a dog in a backpack. A woman with a baby wrapped against her chest in a bedsheet sling. They were exhausted and dirty and frightened and alive. And they looked at my bunker the way travelers look at a rest stop, grateful for the bathroom, not planning to stay. I distributed water. I opened medical supplies. I assigned floor space in the main room and the corridor and the decontamination vestibule, which had never been designed for sleeping, but which could hold 4 people lying head to foot. I worked for 3 hours without stopping, and the work was mechanical and necessary, and it did not feed the thing that had been hungry for 12 days, because these people didn't know my name and didn't need to. They needed water. They needed bandages. They needed a floor. They did not need me. At midnight, the bunker was full beyond any parameter I'd ever modeled. 34 people breathing in 800 square feet. The air system was struggling. I could hear the fans cycling at higher RPM. The filters working harder than their rated capacity. The temperature had risen 4 degrees from body heat alone. The space smelled like sweat and antiseptic and canned food, and the particular ozone scent of too many human beings in a concrete box. I stood in the generator room, the only space still mine. Still private, still humming with the diesel heartbeat I'd listened to for 12 days, and I looked at the fuel gauge. 312 gallons remaining, enough to run the bunker for another 20 days at standard load. At current load, with 34 people, maybe 9. But we weren't staying 20 days. We weren't staying 9. We were leaving in the morning. All of us. Walking 15 miles north to a staging area where the military would load us onto vehicles and drive us to wherever the next safe place was. And the bunker would be empty, and the generator would run until the fuel was gone. And the lights would stay on for no one. And the shelves I'd stocked and the water I'd purified and the air I'd filtered would continue their functions in a room that had been the center of my universe for 11 years and would be, by tomorrow afternoon, a concrete hole in a hillside. I turned off the generator. The hum stopped. The lights went to battery backup dimmer, yellower, emergency grade. In the main room I heard murmurs, a child's whimper, Karen's voice saying something calm. I'd never turned off the generator before. In 11 years, Through every test and every drill and every scenario I'd modeled, the generator was the heartbeat. It was the thing that made the bunker alive. Turning it off was like stopping my own pulse to prove I could survive without it. I couldn't. I turned it back on. The hum resumed, the lights brightened, the fans re-engaged. The bunker breathed again, and so did I. But I'd felt it. The silence. The second and a half of total quiet, when the machine stopped and the room was just a room, and I was just a man in it. We left at dawn on day 15. I want to describe the process of leaving the bunker, because it was the hardest physical act of my life. Harder than pouring the foundation, harder than installing the generator, harder than the $140,000 argument with Karen that nearly ended our marriage in 2017. I walked through each room and I turned off each system: water purification, air filtration, lighting circuits, radio. I unplugged the medical refrigerator and left it open so it wouldn't mold. I drained the water lines. I wiped down the surfaces. I did these things with the precision of a man performing a ritual. And the ritual was a funeral. And the deceased was the version of myself who had lived here in imagination for over a decade. The last thing I did was take the notebook from my back pocket. The list page was gone. I'd torn it out on day 12. But the rest of the notebook was full. Fuel calculations, meal plans, inventory counts, maintenance schedules. The operating manual of a small country with a population of 1, expanding to 13. I set it on the table, open to a blank page, in case someone else found this place and needed to understand what it had been. Then I walked out and didn't lock the door. Not locking it was Bree's idea. She'd said it the night before, quietly, in the back room. The first full sentence she'd spoken to me in 36 hours. Leave it open. Someone else might need it. The obvious act. The generous act. The act that 11 years of preparation and security culture and survival planning had trained me never to do. Leave the door open. Let the bunker be a gift to a stranger I'd never meet. I left it open. The walk north took 11 hours. Terrence led the column. Paul walked sweep at the rear. Dominic moved up and down the line, checking on the elderly, adjusting loads, solving problems with that frictionless competence that I'd resented for 2 weeks and now watched with something closer to exhaustion than envy. I walked in the middle, next to Karen and Bree. Ruby was on Sam's shoulders. Caleb was holding Greg's hand. Lin Huang was in a carry chair that Terrence and Marco had built from cot frames, the same cot frames Dominic had used for his shelf system, repurposed again. Because the bunker's materials kept finding new uses that the bunker's builder hadn't imagined. At mile 7, we hit our first cluster of infected, a group of 5, standing in a roadside ditch, oriented toward nothing. Terrence raised a hand, and the column stopped. We rerouted through a field, silent, wide. The infected didn't track us. They stood in their ditch like broken machines waiting for an input that would never come. At mile 11, Bree walked next to me for the first time. "You left the door open," she said. "You told me to." I suggested it. "You did it. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" She thought about this. 17 and honest, which is a combination that has no mercy, but also no malice. "No," she said. "It's supposed to make you accurate." We reached the staging area at 4 p.m. It was real. Military vehicles, medical tents, soldiers with rifles and efficiency, and the impersonal competence of an institution that didn't need anyone's name to function. They processed us in groups. They checked for bites. They handed out water bottles and MREs and Mylar blankets and the whole apparatus of organized rescue that made my bunker look like what it was. One man's answer to a question that required a civilization. Greg found me in the processing line. He put his hand on my shoulder, the gesture Dominic had used on me 12 years ago at the barbecue. The patronizing shoulder squeeze that had lodged in me like a hook. But from Greg, it wasn't patronizing. It was the hand of a man who owed me his son's life, and had watched me almost become someone unworthy of the debt, and was choosing to pay it anyway. Thank you, Nate. Don't. I mean it. I know, don't. Because the thank you wasn't safe anymore. Not because Greg was insincere, but because I now understood what I did with gratitude. When I held it, I built thrones out of it and sat in them and called it being prepared. Karen took my hand in the line. She didn't say anything. Bree was ahead of us, talking to Maya about something I couldn't hear. And the two of them were almost smiling. Terrence was helping Lin Huang out of the carry chair. Teresa was translating for a medic. Dominic was already talking to a lieutenant, probably volunteering for something, probably being immediately useful in a way I'd never be able to replicate, and had finally stopped wanting to. I held Karen's hand, and I stood in line, and I waited for someone else to tell me where to go. The bunker is 15 miles south of here, and the door is still open. I think about that every day. Not the supplies I left, or the fuel in the generator, or the water purification system that cost me 6 years to assemble. I think about the open door. I think about the fact that someone might walk through it tonight. A stranger, exhausted, bleeding, alone, and find shelter I built, and food I stocked, and a blank notebook on a table where a list used to be. I hope they never know my name. That's new for me. For 11 years, the fantasy was recognition. The bunker was a mirror I built to reflect back a version of myself that the world refused to see. And when the world finally looked, what it showed me wasn't the prepared man, the vindicated man, the man who'd been right all along. It showed me a man turning down a radio so people couldn't hear that rescue was coming. Bree was right. Karen was right. Terrence was right. The bunker worked. The man inside it almost didn't. Being right nearly made me monstrous. Being needed nearly made me cruel. And the people who laughed at me, Greg with his Coors Light, Dominic with his shoulder squeeze, those people saved me from myself by needing a version of me that was better than the one I was becoming. Not because they demanded it, because they deserved it. I don't prep anymore. I carry water for the group, and I stand in lines, and I let other people make decisions, and I am learning, slowly, at 47, that the difference between being useful and being needed is the difference between a door and a throne. I left the door open. Someone else can sit down.